And now I'm recording. So good. I'll mount that after class is over. Let's see. I do dim the lights, and I'll tell you this little story that my undergraduate art history advisor told too. Here, let's see. Open one of those a little bit so we get a little bit more light. If you could. Thank you very much. And yeah, that should give us enough light to sort of work by. Right? That's great. Good for people. Can you see your right? The other thing I'll mention is that we're always going to be up here. So the bottom feeders. You want to see the works of art unobscured by other people. Look at all these chairs. Here, I tend not to sit when I talk, right? And that's if I stay back here, I won't be in your way that way. But the closer you sit, the easier it is to see. As an undergrad, I was a 2/3 of the way back kind of guy, right? So I understand wanting to sit back there, but that's up to you. I'm just saying that this is where we're going to be looking. Okay. My undergraduate professor said to me, this little story I always pass on to every class. The way that they cure insomnia is they put you in a very dark room and they make you stare at the wall and they shine a very bright light on the wall. And they put a dull droning sound in the background and people just tend to fall asleep. And this is why driving at night can be so fatiguing, right? Because you're doing exactly that. You're in a dark space, staring at a bright light, and engine noise, right? It's just naturally. Well, that's art history, right? A dark room, bright light, and dull droning sound. So the prof I had this really droll sense of humor, and he would always have his classes meet at 2 in the afternoon, right after lunch. And I used to think that I was being really cool because I could tip my glasses just so that the light from, and he had projectors, old school, right? Diapositive projectors, so they were humming in the background, kicking out warm air, and it was just, oh, it was nice. And he just said, it was so boring. And I loved him dearly, but it was boring. And so anyway, I tipped my glasses just so the reflection, I thought, made it so you couldn't see that my eyes were closed. Don't do that. Don't do like I did. Okay, so let's. This is kind of where we're starting, right around 1300 in Italy. Works from this period are often referred to as Italo-Byzantine. We'll talk a little bit about why that is. And you'll notice with each of these two images, it's the same subject matter, which is one of the things that we'll be investigating. So what I want to use this first, what's left of the class, to talk about is what do we do in art history classes? What is art history all about? Because it's not a class that forms part of the curriculum of most high schools. And since this is an intro class, there's a good chance this is the first one you've had, right? Even the grad students from ID, the only reason you're here is because you haven't had it before. So what do we do in art history, right? Well, in art history, what we do is, like I mentioned before, we investigate works of art and we try to analyze them. And in many ways, I see this as somewhat similar to the sciences because we look at something, we look at it closely, and we start to ask questions about it based on our observations. So this puts us very similar to botany, say, right? You look at a fir tree and you try to figure out how it works, and you get into cell structure, you talk about mitochondria and whatnot. Well, we're going to get into this and we're starting to look at all of the elements that make up the work of art and try to figure out what effect they have in the finished product. And we proceed from the idea that the artist who made them, whether we know them or not, and we don't know the artist for either of these, whether we know them or not, the artist who made them has made a series of deliberate choices that lead us to the finished product, that nothing's really by chance in this. We may find that every now and then we violate that rule, but on the norm, that's what we proceed from, is that these are deliberate choices. Why did the artist make the choices that they did? And what effect do those choices have on the messages, the meanings that the work of art communicates? Right? So even if it was just a mistake, does that affect the meaning that the work of art communicates? And for those of you that are in the creative arts, and the vast majority of you are, this is an important thing to consider. Everything you do has an impact on the messages you communicate. And that's true even if you're outside of the creative arts. Your choices matter, right? So, with these two works, we'll break down what kinds of questions do we ask. The first question is questions about subject matter. Now, the $10 term in our history for this is iconography. Icon means images, graphy, right? The study of, right? Iconography, the study of subject matter. So both of these show us the Madonna and Child. The Virgin Mary, Madonna in Italian, my lady, right? Our Lady, Madonna, and Child. The Virgin Mary from Christian religion and her son, born of God, Jesus Christ, right? The child in this case, right? But as a shorthand, Madonna and Child is fine. You sometimes see them called Virgin and Child, right? That's our subject matter. In this case, we could take it a step further and talk about the subject matter being enthroned, right? Each one of the images shows the Virgin sitting on a throne with Christ on her lap. We're just describing the subject matter here, right? In addition to that, the subject matter also includes two angels who appear in those little circles, in $10 term, roundels, over her shoulder on either side. This is all part of the subject matter. And you'll notice in looking at the two that it's pretty conventional, the subject matter is, right? So in each of them, look at how her head cocks toward Christ, right? Leaning over toward him. Look at how he gestures in each of them. He's got the same sort of Boy Scout thing going on, right? He's blessed. This is how the priest blesses you in church, right? I think in Latin and Catholicism it's the Pax Vobis, peace be unto you, right? And he's got that exact same gesture in each of them, right? Look at her as she holds him. He's got one hand on his hip, the other hand coming across his thigh, and you'll notice if you look at that other hand, the one that's in front, that it's almost in exactly the same position, right? The fingers parted in exactly the same way. It's really conventional, right? There's a lot of repetition in the subject matter. Some variations within that repetition, but a significant amount of repeats, right? So we're beginning, and one of the questions we're asking is why, right? Why are they so conventional? Why do they do things so very similarly? Small differences within that. Christ looks at Mary in the one on the right. Mary looks at Christ in the one on the left. Mary looks at us in the one on the right. Christ looks at us in the one on the left. Little subtle differences in each of them, right? So far we're just kind of talking about subject matter. This is one of the things that we will be investigating. Because sometimes it's pretty obvious. To the Christians in the audience, this is pretty obvious, pretty straightforward, not a lot of mysterious content here, right? But this might take up all of our conversation with some pictures. What the heck, right? So subject matter iconography is one of the three principal avenues or areas that we study in our history. The second major area is what we call style. This is what separates one artist's work from another artist's work. Personal style. Now, sometimes we find that style is, again, conventional. That there's a particular style that all artists in a particular time period in one country are using. So if we look at works of art from Italy, around the middle of the 13th century, 1200s, 13th century, right? We'll find that their works look awfully similar. Whereas, if we were to bump up to France, at exactly the same time, we would find that their works look somewhat different. Style are the choices that the artists make in things like body proportions, colors, the degree in which they try to make it look three-dimensional, the medium or these things are artistic choices that play into style. Right? This is our second major avenue of discussion. And one of the things that we find is that style is also a choice. Now, we tend to think that artistic style is something you can't help. It's an extension of who you are, extension of your personality. But what we find through the history of art is that's not always the case. That artists are often making stylistic choices with the idea of enhancing a particular meaning, enhancing a particular idea. Right? So style becomes something that we need to be looking at, discerning, and finding more about. Right? Now, as I just mentioned, when we talk about style, it comes down to also talking about the materials the artist works with. In art history, we call this the medium. Right? It's the singular for the word media. Right? We now tend to think of media as being news outlets. Right? But it comes back to the original Latin word for materials, the medium. And the medium is not only what the artist paints with, but what the artist paints on. Or if it's sculpture, what's the materials that make up the three-dimensional object? Right? Or if it's a print, what are the inks that go into the print? What kind of paper are they using? The same thing for a drawing. Right? The medium. So in this case, this is a kind of paint called tempera paint on a wooden panel, more specifically oak. And most paintings prior to 1500 were painted on wood panels. This was the norm, right? Tempera paint, does anyone know what tempera paint is?
Is that water-based?
Not exactly. It has water in it, but the main base of tempera is egg yolk. So all paints consist of two parts, right? One is the pigment, which is the dried color matter that they would actually buy at a chemist's shop. So they can be anything from ground up stones to ground up plants to ground up bugs, right? In this case, the blue is made from aquamarine. It's made from lapis lazuli, imported from the Far East. Most expensive pigment around, right? Ground up, and then it's emulsified into the binding agent. Okay? These days, we just buy in a tube. It's easy peasy, right? You get a gouache, you get a acrylic or oil paint, right? It's already done for you. But back then, they would do this themselves in the studio, right? Mix it up. Get a studio assistant, some flunky to do it for them, right? So egg tempera paint is egg yolks with the dry stuff mixed into it. And that is two things that come out of a result of that egg tempera paint. One, a little bit of oil, just a touch or two to make it stretch out. Two things that come out of that. One, it dries pretty quick. Okay. Number two, it dries opaque. You can't see through it. So when we look at the paint, we tend to see little sort of sketch marks on the surface. And this will become more apparent with some other slides that we'll see. Okay? And so what we see here also on this is the crack pattern that happens through age, right? Which is a nice thing to see, actually. It helps us to know that it is what it pretends to be. And the crack pattern comes from the wood expanding and relaxing over the course of time. You get these cracks, right? Things don't dry out the same. So egg tempera is what the colors are here. In addition to the egg tempera, we also have on the background real gold. Gold leaf. Now, gold has the ability to be pounded thinner than paper thin. Just, I mean, like, you know, go get some 2-ply toilet paper, split the 2 plies apart, and then we're getting closer, right? Gold can be hammered incredibly thin. And so what they'll do is they'll polish the surface with a little bit of clay, some slip, thin down clay, and that gives it a sort of quasi-magnetic quality that makes the gold just stick to it automatically. And in Italy, they will actually take that background, and they'll put designs into the background called tooling. Do I have that? Not yet. Called tooling that you can see here for the halo. And when the gold lays down, it lays down into those changes on the surface that the artist has made. Right? So her halo is sort of drawn onto the background, and then the gold adheres over the surface of that. Okay? All of this, the tempera and the gold leaf, is then, as I said, on the support, which in this case is a wooden panel, which was the norm for all paintings from the introduction of independent paintings, which was around 1200, all the way through to around 1500 when they started using canvases, which is what we're used to today. But that didn't really come in regularly until around 1500. Okay. In this slide, you can see the tooling even better in Christ's halo and the edge of the Virgin Mary's halo as well. You can also see the degree to which the anatomy is a little cockeyed. Jesus looks a little toad-like. No disrespect to our Lord and Savior, but he certainly is not the handsomest baby. I've always been kind of interested in baby Jesuses because they're not very cute until around 1500 either. They tend to look like little men. And there's a lot of excuses for that. Were they having babies pose for them? Right? A. But B, Jesus was born, theologically speaking, Jesus was born with full knowledge, right, of everything, including his fate, including the fate of mankind, all the past, all the future. So to make him look like a little man with, male pattern baldness, sort of suggests this idea that he's embodying maturity even as a youth, right? So there's a payoff insofar as the subject matter is concerned, insofar as the meaning is concerned, right? So, subject matter, style, right, are two major issues that we investigate with each one of these works, okay? And within subject matter, there's the idea of symbolism, which we were just talking about, with Jesus as the all-knowing infinite, okay? We then try to put these things into some historical context. And that becomes our third major avenue, is the historical context of the piece. This is what separates a class like this, art history, from an art appreciation class. We're not just going to sit around and talk about how beautiful things are or how ugly Jesus is. They'll enter into it, but what we'll talk about is why did this artist choose to do these particular things? Why does the style look the way it does? Why did they even choose that subject matter in the first place? Okay. So, as we talk about style, one of the things that we see happen around the year 1300 is two things. One, artists start to identify themselves. We start to have records of who did what, and we can put these things together. They didn't sign pictures, but we have documents that help us to identify artistic personalities, individuals. Giotto is often referred to as the first artist of the Renaissance. 150 years later, the first art history was written. A guy named Giorgio Vasari, V-A-S-A-R-I, was a pupil of Michelangelo, painter, right? Studying under Michelangelo, decided he was going to sit down and write the history of Renaissance art. The lives of the most eminent artists, painters, sculptors, and architects, right? And he says Giotto is the first light of the Renaissance. Looking back, right? It's a great source for us to have. Now, with this focus on Giotto as an individual that brought something about, rather than our other artists who we don't know much about, we see some changes to the style. If you look at the Madonna on the right, the earlier one, look at her robe, look at Christ's robe, and you'll notice that while we see folds draping over her knees and over her arm and around her body, those folds are treated in duochrome. They're either gold or they're blue. But the blue isn't really shaded at all. Does that make sense? Right? And everywhere you look, it kind of ends up looking kind of flat. You know? It flattens it out because you see this pattern of these gold lines that don't really model the figure in 3 dimensions. There's some attempt, there's some knowledge. You can tell that her arm is in front of her chest, but there's not a light side of the arm and a shaded side of the arm. There's just some gold. Look at Giotto. Look at the drapery that Giotto paints. Notice the range of tones that Giotto includes in modeling her body. Right? Now, our Italo-Byzantine artist knew how to do this. Look at the face of the Virgin. Look at the face of Jesus. But he only does it in the fleshy bits. Right? He doesn't do it everywhere. And that flattening of this face that comes through the gold lines, the striations across the robe, is enhanced when we look at that throne, which is really goofy. The perspective doesn't work. Right? Perspective, perspective, right? You stand on the railroad tracks and they look like they come together, right? A highway in Utah, right? They look like they come together. Well, parallel lines should converge the further they are from your eye. Right? This is why you guys in the back look smaller than the people in the front. Right? This diverges as we go further back. So the sense of space is violated. Right? It makes everything else sit up on the surface. Now, Giotto is still using gold background. He's still using tempera paint. He's still tooling the gold background to give us the patterns, but he's trying to model the figure in 3 dimensions. There's no space around her here, but she looks really 3-dimensional. And this is something we see happening in a lot of art around 1300. The style starts to change. And this change toward a more realistic, 3-dimensional visual effect on a 2-dimensional surface. This is why Vasari said, 150 years later, he demanded, right? This is where it starts. This is the first step on the road that leads to Michelangelo. Okay? So, as we talk about style and subject matter, it is the same subject matter with certain tweaks within it, right? Instead of blessing, he's reaching for this rose. Instead of holding a little scroll, probably the book of life, he had a book in the other one, right? He grabs her finger. It's kind of cute, isn't it? That says, this is the Virgin Mary pull my finger. Some of you may or may not know that joke, but it's a very charming little detail, And then if we look at other details within it, we find, he's still got male pattern baldness, but the sort of physiognomy, the structure of the face seems a little bit better understood. Right? It fits better. Yeah, okay, he's got kind of heavy jowls and a strange forehead. Giotto's figures always tend to have sort of a Frankenstein brow. That's typical for his works, right? But there is a sense of the anatomy, and even Jesus' body looking a little bit more solidly 3-dimensional. So this would probably make a better comparison. I should have had this up before so we could see them in the same cropping and roughly at the same scale. This modeling I've been talking about, again, here's our nice $10 art historical word, right? The way in which Giotto models in grades of light and dark is what's called in art chiaroscuro. We still use that even in drawing classes. We talk about chiaroscuro. It simply means in Italian, chiaro, light, scuro, obscure, dark, right? That's all it means, light, dark. Right? And that's what we call the kind of modeling that Giotto is using here. He's one of 3 or 4 artists right around 1300 who are moving away from this older style into something new. With this move toward more realistic looking 3-dimensional figures, we also have an interest in humanizing the image. Jesus has that tender little touch between mother and child, even though she's still looking directly at you, right?
he seems to be resting more realistically on her arm. Right? Let's go back, right? Here, in this case, she's kind of holding him up with a hand under his, but there's a sense with the Giotto that there's a weight that she has to support there, right? And his body, as you can see, is fairly well modeled, also in chiaroscuro, light and dark. And he's grabbing her finger, right? This certainly seems to be a reference to the mother-child relationship, that Giotto sees the Madonna and Child not as the Queen of Heaven and her son, the coming King of Heaven. Theological concepts. He sees them as the real people they were. A mother and her child. And they interact in a way that relates to that. Here's a nice... keep buying better cameras so I can get really good pictures for the classroom, right? And here you can see with the tempera paint, you can start to see those little lines I was talking about because tempera dries opaque, right? How he's laying down the paint in these different layers because he can't allow them to be transparent, right? That doesn't work that way. Right? Now, why is he holding her finger? Right? We see this happen 2 or 3 different times. Somebody has suggested that, in fact, it's not only just simply this tenderness of their relationship, sort of mirroring a real mother and child, but it might also have something to do with matrimony. Within Christian theology, right, the Virgin Mary is referred to as the bride of heaven. She's the church. Notre Dame, right? All the churches named Notre Dame. She is the church. She is all of us. She's the bride of heaven. Christ is the King of heaven. So while they're mother and child, physically, theologically, they're unified. And this idea of the held finger has been tied into that. Right? So there's symbolic elements to it as well as simply trying to incorporate this idea of tenderness and a human connection. Again, good detail so we can see the laying down of that tempera paint around her chin. But also, and this is a wonderful detail, right? She's talking. Her mouth is open. She's breathing. You see her teeth inside her lips. Right? He's making every effort to make her look as if she is a living, breathing, real presence. He's bringing realism, or maybe a better term is naturalism, into the painting, enhancing that element, making them seem. Now, look at the wonderful red line around their eyelid, right? There's blood in their veins, you know? The eyes have a little bit of blue around the sides, as our eyes tend to look in real life. So he's really moving toward making it significantly more realistic. Right? So as we look at it, right, we can start to talk about subject matter, same subject matter as the one let's put the one we saw before up. It's our next slide anyway. Right? Still the same subject matter. We don't see the entire figure. We see it cropped off at the bottom, right? But with some changes to the subject matter, we started to talk about the grabbing of the finger, right? And significant changes to the style. Some things stay the same, but a lot of things are changing. The last thing we'll mention, and then we'll quit. Friday we'll talk about why, right? We'll get to the point of like, how do we explain this, right? The last thing to point to here is the other part that I've left out. What's he doing with his other hand? He's reaching for this flower, right? The Virgin's holding a flower, and Christ is reaching for it. And you'll notice that what the Virgin is doing is really subtle in John's picture. Moving it away from him, right? He's reaching for it, and then it tips away from his hand as he goes for it. It's a rose. In fact, we can identify the variety of rose. I'm not going to bother you. Right? But it's a rose, and the rose is seen as a symbol of the Virgin Mary. Many flowers become symbols of the Virgin Mary. The lily, because it's white, very, very tall, great. And the rose was, through the Middle Ages, a symbol for the Virgin. The reason? It's fragrant, right? As beautiful, she is spiritually beautiful. But over and above that, the rose, soft, beautiful smelling petals grow from a thorny branch. Right? Think about the theological legacy of women from a male theological perspective. The thorny branch is the legacy of Eve, the sin. Thorn, Adam, pain. The flower is the virgin. Surprisingly soft, yet growing from that legacy. Okay? So the rose was, and through the Middle Ages, we would find people who would write about nature in these sorts of terms. Right? So what's Christ doing is he's reaching for the virgin's rose. And just as he's grabbing her finger, he's going to grab her symbol as well. But you'll notice what she's doing. He's reaching for the thorny bit, and she's protecting him so he doesn't prick his finger. And then, theologically, right, how do we tie this in? The Virgin Mary made sure through Christ's life that he would be safe from most temptation, especially while he was a child. She's protecting him here. Making sure that he stays safe from sin, faithful to his cause. The blue she wears is in fact a theological symbol through the Middle Ages of faithfulness. Right? She will be faithful to his cause, make sure that he makes it through childhood when he's vulnerable, so that he can eventually go out and, as she well knows, die for the sins of mankind. Right? So, Giotto has made certain subtle changes in subject matter that humanize it, that add theology, but he's also made fairly drastic changes in style. We still have tooled gold backgrounds. We still have the blue robe of the Virgin Mary. We still have Christ in kind of the same position, right? But it's this chiaroscuro modeling everywhere that Giotto brings to the work. We'll talk about what brought about this stylistic change and see other examples of it in Giotto and other artists on Friday. Okay? That's it. 1:15, how's that for time? A little bit early, but that's okay. I will see you guys on Friday.